Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The sound of her own breath felt foreign in the suffocating darkness as Sylvia stepped into the dilapidated house that had once belonged to her grandmother. It stood alone at the edge of an overgrown forest, shadows clinging to its weathered facade like a shroud. The peak of twilight cast a mauve haze, utterly unlike the bright sepia tones of memories she had of this place. Each step left her with an unsettling nostalgia, a longing overshadowed by an eerie dread. As a child, she would run barefoot across the creaky wooden floors, her laughter rising against the distant whispers of the trees. But that laughter had faded, and now it hung, brittle and lifeless, before her. With a shiver dancing across her skin, she stepped inside. The air thickened with must and decay, enveloping her like a wet blanket. Dust motes floated in the fading light, swirling around her like tiny spirits awoken from their long slumber. The scent of damp wood and mildew clawed at her throat. Every inhale a reminder that she was alone, that her family was gone. Sylvia wandered through the narrow hallways, her fingertips brushing against the peeling wallpaper that offered glimpses of flora she barely recognized. A sudden chill enveloped the room, and for just a moment, she swore she felt a breath on her neck, brittle and cold. As she made her way to the kitchen, every creak of the floorboards beneath her felt like a heartbeat, a rhythmic pulse echoing the stillness that had hungrily risen to fill the void. The table, once alive with the aromas of her grandmother's cooking, stood bare. Sylvia forced the memories aside, unwilling to let the warmth of the past extinguish her resolve. She had come here to collect what was left: old photographs, heirlooms, anything that could knit together the fragmented threads of her family history. The kitchen window, partially shattered, revealed the encroaching darkness of the forest, twisted trees clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. In its depths, something seemed to twitch, a flicker of movement that sent a shudder racing down her spine. She hesitated, a sense of being watched creeping into her bones. Telling herself it was merely her imagination, she turned back to rummage through a cracked cabinet. A heavy chill suffocated the air again, and a whispering breeze sent a shiver through her hair, yet she could not shake the feeling of an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. Hours passed, marked only by the relentless march of the shadows. The pantry, filled with jars of odd meats and herbs long past their expiration, brimmed with an absinthe-like scent of something pungent. A soft thud reverberated from the living room, spiking her adrenaline. Hesitating, she leaned forward, listening intently. Silence swept over the house, but the thud struck again, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Heart pounding, she edged toward the source, the floor creaking beneath her cautious steps. In the living room, the fireplace lay cold and dark, but beside it, the old armchair swayed from side to side. At first, she thought it was just the draft, but as she approached, she could see the fabric shifting as if something or someone had been sitting there. A frigid gust swept through the air, and in that moment Sylvia knew she was not alone. Panic clawed at her throat as she backed away, the shadows blending together, folding in on themselves, sewing an inescapable tapestry of dread. With a rush of adrenaline, she fled to the front door, but it slammed shut just as she reached for the handle. The sound reverberated like the crack of thunder, and her heart raced as the world outside darkened even further. Through the window, the forest seemed to encroach closer, as if the trees were seeking her out, their limbs outstretched and waiting. Desperation drove her to the kitchen, desperately searching for something, anything, to fend off the creeping darkness. The refrigerator stood silent, its door slightly ajar. Heart racing, she pulled it open, and the sudden blast of icy air felt like salvation. But as she dug through the half-rotten remnants, her fingers grazed something smooth and cold, an old photograph, weathered, of her grandmother standing outside the very house she was now trapped in, a smile stretching across her lips. Behind her, in the shadows, a figure loomed, indistinguishable but oddly familiar. The smile twisted in a way that gnawed at Sylvia's stomach. Whispers filled the air, soft and dissonant, layering over one another, until the sound became a cacophony. She felt them seep into her mind, urging her to stay, to remember, their brush as tangible as a loving hand, but laced with malice. Gripped by an unseen force, Sylvia stumbled back into the living room, the floor creaking with the weight of the past, echoing tales she had never known to fear. The armchair was still swaying, rocking gently as if inviting her to sit. Against the growing panic, her curiosity pushed her forward, a magnetic pull toward the very essence of her bloodline wrapped in warmth and despair. As she plopped down, the room grew warmer, shadows stretching out like living things over her, whispering, secrets buried deep, reality blurred, and she could almost hear the voices of those who had come before her, beckoning, pleading for her to understand. Then came the realization. They weren't gone. Sylvia felt her body go numb, everything around her melting into colors and sensations, the sights twisting, melding until she could no longer tell where she ended and they began. The forest outside swirled with vibrant life, and the trees whispered her name like a lover. With every heartbeat, she felt their essence infuse her, their sorrow and longing intertwining with her very soul. The door to the house creaked open behind her, the forest beckoning her to join it. Sylvia's heart raced, broadening with a dark awareness. She recognized their intentions, a family reunion that transcended life, a relentless tie that could pull her into eternity. With a final burst of clarity, she grasped the photograph, the face of her grandmother still smiling, a dark void behind the grin. But it was too late, as she felt the roots of the house entwine with her, pulling her deeper into the shadows, into the embrace of those who were lost, those who lingered in the folds of history, eternally united beneath the weight of forgotten rituals. The last conscious thought she grasped as darkness engulfed her was a nagging sense that no one would ever understand, that even in their unity they remained tragically alone. The forest was alive with the sound of screams. Not the screams of humans, but the anguished wails of the trees, twisting and creaking as the wind howled through branches like a chorus of the damned. It was just past dusk, the fading sunlight, casting feeble shadows across the moss-covered ground. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling air. It was as if the ancient woods were exhaling their breath upon her. They whispered secrets, their gnarled roots reaching for her feet in an insatiable quest for warmth. She had grown up in these woods, yet tonight they felt foreign, hungry. With each step deeper into the darkened heart of the forest, her pulse quickened, the anxiety spiraling within her like a taut coil ready to snap. She was searching for her brother, Ben, who had gone missing 3 days ago. The frantic search had led her to the very place her mother had warned her to avoid, as a child, a cursed patch where the dead did not rest. The town below might have reported him as lost, but Sarah felt it in her bones. Something sinister had claimed him. Shadows slipped and slithered between the trees. She sensed eyes, unseen, unwavering, watching her every move. As twilight descended, fog began to weave through the branches, heavy and damp, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. She spotted something shimmering against the bark of a towering oak, a glint of metal half buried in the earth. Heart pounding, she knelt to brush away the damp leaves, revealing a tarnished locket engraved with the initials BM. It belonged to him. Her breath hitched as she held the locket tightly, a jolt of fear electrifying her. This was no mere accident. It was a message. The air thickened with a palpable dread, as if the very forest were curling around her, stifling her breath. Panic surged within her, but she pressed on, calling his name. The trees responded with a rustling that felt too deliberate, too aware of her plea. In the silence that followed, every snap of a twig echoed like thunder, reverberating within her, amplifying her isolation. Distantly, she heard a faint singing, a song that was both beautiful and cruel, luring her deeper into the woods. There was a wrongness to the sound. It stirred an instinctive dread, warning her to turn back. Yet, like a moth to the flame, she followed the melody, promising herself that she would save Ben from whatever peril had ensnared him. Minutes stretched into hours, and the trees grew denser, squeezing the path until she barely squeezed through the ancient trunks. The air turned heavy, saturated with the smell of wet earth and something acrid, a rot that settled nauseatingly in her stomach. As she stumbled forward, the song warped, distorting into laughter, cruel and taunting. Sarah's heart raced. Was that Ben's laughter? Fear clawed at her throat, choking any remaining courage she possessed. The shadow seemed to shift, forming shapes just out of the corner of her eye, a shifting tapestry of nightmares lurking just beyond her vision. Finally, she broke through into a small clearing. In its center stood a decrepit altar, overgrown, with vines, unholy runes etched into its stone surface. The air vibrated with a dark energy, thickening her skin and prickling her senses. She could sense it now, a presence, watching. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to run, but she would not leave without finding Ben. As she circled the altar, she envisioned her brother, his laughter, the way his blue eyes sparkled when he caught her in a lie. A sharp sound, the crumpling of underbrush, froze her in place. From behind the altar emerged a figure impossibly tall, framed by the shadows that clung to it like a tattered cloak. It moved with an unnatural grace, each step echoing in the heavy silence. A twisted sense of recognition rushed through her. The figure resembled her brother. The laughter that spilled from its lips was a broken melody, familiar yet wrong. Sarah's heart plummeted as realization dawned. This was not Ben. This was a shadow, a caricature of him, a vessel filled with something ancient and hungry. Desperately, she backpedaled, tripping over roots that coiled around her like serpents. The creature lunged, its limbs stretching unnaturally, reaching for her with elongated fingers that crumbled into wisps of smoke. In that instant, Sarah remembered her childhood, shared stories of a dark spirit that feasted on the souls lost within these woods. With a fractured heart, she knew the truth. Ben had fed this malevolent force, and it craved more. She was at the altar, a sacrificial offering. The ground erupted beneath her great weight, the roots rising like angry serpents, coiling around her ankles and pulling her toward the altar. Helpless, fear constricted her throat, and as she glimpsed the amorphous face of the creature, she saw her brother's features melded with something monstrous, a grotesque reflection of her own despair. The forest hummed with energy as the shadows, closed in, eager to consume. In one final push of a desperate will to survive, she screamed Ben's name, her voice raw with grief. The singing stopped momentarily, replaced by an unsettling hush that enveloped the clearing, a stillness that felt almost sacred. With a final gasp, she plunged forward, not into the creature but into the altar, releasing the locket she still held. The thing recoiled, shrieking, a sound that echoed with pain and rage as it dissolved back into the shadows from where it had come. As the ground settled, the forest around her stayed unnaturally silent, the trees now still, their secrets tightly held once more. Sarah felt the weight of fatigue and loss settle onto her shoulders. Before her lay nothing but barren earth. She was alone, the remnants of her brother swallowed by the ancient woods, leaving only the locket to remind her of the price of curiosity. She stumbled back, driven by the instinct to escape. Yet deep down, she understood that the forest had not simply taken Ben, it had claimed her as well. The shadows flickered behind her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched again. There was no path home. As she turned, the laughter returned. Not from behind, but within. Her own mind echoing endlessly sweet and tainted. The forest consumed its own. The faint aroma of decaying leaves hung heavy in the air as Rebecca stepped into the dank embrace of the whispering woods, a dense forest shunned by locals since the disappearance of 5 children decades ago. The sun, a weak orb in a smog-streaked sky, barely pierced the canopy of twisted branches, casting grotesque shadows that danced like wraiths upon the ground. Each snap of twigs beneath her worn hiking boots echoed ominously, a constant reminder of her isolation in this forgotten corner of the world. She had come to escape the bustle of life in the city, seeking solace in nature, but there was an unsettling anticipation clinging to her like the humidity in the air. A chill skittered down her spine as a low fog began to curl around her ankles, coiling like an ethereal serpent, though many had recounted horrific tales of this place. Rebecca, with her rational mind, dismissed them as mere folklore spun from grief and fear. Still, an inexplicable sensation burrowed deep within her, a whispering doubt that perhaps the tales held a grain of truth. As she ventured further, the trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled limbs scratching at her skin like skeletal fingers, begging her to turn back. But curiosity led her deeper, where the forest revealed its sinister beauty. Ancient trees twisted into uncanny shapes, their bark peeling like rotten flesh, exposing an iridescent glow beneath. The ground felt spongy beneath her feet, sucking in the warmth as she walked. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through, her bones growing louder, a cacophony of whispers that seemed to beckon her closer. The sound was both beautiful and terrifying, each note laced with an unsettling familiarity that gnawed at the edges of her memory. It was then she stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its structure hunched like an old man caught in the throes of despair. Vines wrapped around the door as if trying to protect a secret long forgotten. Despite the unease stirred by its presence, Rebecca felt drawn to it, compelled to learn what it might hide. Pushing aside the vines, she pried the door open, which creaked with a mournful sigh, welcoming her into the darkness beyond. The air inside was dense with mildew, the dim light filtering through cracked windows illuminating dust motes swirling like spirits in distress. On the floor lay remnants of a lifelong past, children's toys, tarnished picture frames, and small shoes too tiny for even memories. But it was the walls that held her gaze, covered in odd symbols intertwined with hastily scrawled phrases. Beware the heedless. They listen, and the lost must find. A wave of nausea hit her, as if the very cabin breathed with a pulse of malice, and she fought the urge to flee. As time slipped away, Rebecca lost herself in the unease of the cabin, each minute stretching into an hour, blending reality with nightmarish reveries. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, looping around her thoughts like a dark melody. Shadows flitted through her peripheral vision, and she began to question the solidity of her senses. Were the memories of the children real, or merely figments of her frayed mind? Each echo was a reminder of their fate, tethering her deeper into the wood's sinister embrace. A sudden crash reverberated through the cabin, splintering her thoughts like the wood beneath her feet. Heart racing, she spun around, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, yet all that remained was the dense silence. Panic seized her, and she bolted to the door, intent on escaping, when she caught sight of something, a glimpse of movement outside. A childlike figure darted between the trees, beckoning with an outstretched hand, its face obscured by the thick air. Confused and terrified, Rebecca felt the pull of the figure, her own curiosity battling the primal instinct to flee. The lure of the unknown was irresistible, and before she could contemplate the danger, she found herself stepping back into the fog, the whispers now a cacophony of laughter, a cruel crescendo that buried her resolve. Each footfall carried her closer to the entity, and the forest seemed to shift, the paths twisting and turning impossibly. The child's laughter became hauntingly familiar, and as she reached the crest of a hill, her heart plummeted. There they were, 5 children from the stories, their faces blank as if carved from stone, staring right through her with hollow eyes that spoke volumes of despair. They were trapped in a never-ending cycle, lost to the woods, drawn to their fate as she was now. She turned to run, but the earth beneath her buckled, and the ground split open like a gaping maw, pulling her down. Falling into the abyss, she felt the cool embrace of the earth, her screams swallowed by the darkness. In that moment, clarity washed over her. The woods were not merely a place, but a living entity, feeding on fear and drawing the lost into its eternal night. Stripped of her defenses, she surrendered to the whispers, realizing too late that she too had become one with the lost. Time stretched into infinity, and as her mind spiraled into madness, she understood the cruel twist. The woods would never let her go, nor would they allow her to forget. Now she roamed the forest, forever a part of it, her laughter mingling with that of the children, waiting patiently for the next curious soul to wander too far, drawn in by their call. And as evening fell, the cabin stood silent once more, the air thick with anticipation, a trap set for those who craved the beauty of isolation in a place where comfort turned to horror, and shadows held their breath, eager for the next lost wanderer. The flickering streetlight cast a sickly yellow glow over the empty sidewalk, the only remnant of life in a town that had succumbed to decay. Broken windows stared vacantly, shadows whispering stories of people who had once filled the air with laughter and warmth. It was here, in late autumn, when the chill settled like an unwelcome hand on the spine, that Eleanor Abernathy returned to her childhood home, a dilapidated Victorian that stood at the end of Thornfield Lane. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and mold, as if the house, with its sagging roof and peeling paint, was exhaling the remorse of years spent in silence. Eleanor was seeking closure. The recent loss of her mother had unearthed memories she wished she could forget. She had always felt a strange connection to this place, one that tugged at her heart like an unseen weight. With her mother gone, the urge to confront the past became overwhelming. As she crossed the threshold, The front door creaked eerily as if recognizing her presence, and a thin layer of dust danced in the stale air, swirling in the golden light like spirits trapped within. The familiar scents of her childhood were intermingled with something else, something sour and unsettling. Eleanor could hear the faintest thrum of the old house as if it were alive, breathing in time with her own heartbeat. Each step down the narrow hallway awakened distant echoes, the floorboards moaning as she shifted her weight. Photographs hung crookedly on the walls, their glass faces obscured by grime, yet she felt their eyes upon her, bearing witness to the unspoken woes embedded in this home. As night descended, the oppressive darkness enveloped her like a shroud, the outside world fading away until all that remained was the cacophony of her thoughts. Eleanor lit a single candle, its flickering, flame casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. Thoughts of her childhood bubbled up like murky water rising in a well, memories twisted into a jumbled mess of laughter, warmth, and an undercurrent of something far more sinister. In her mother's old study, she found an ancient tome wedged between decaying manuscripts, its pages brittle and yellowed. Something compelled her to open it. Scrawled notes littered the margins, her mother's frenzied handwriting a contrast to the elegant, scripted text on the pages. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, speaking of rituals and markings of others who sought to unearth what should remain buried. Eleanor's pulse quickened as she read, each line tethering her deeper into the house's malevolent grip. As the candle flickered, a chill swept through the room, snuffing out the flame. Darkness clawed at her senses. A whisper echoed in the silence, soft and elusive, like the caress of cold fingers along her spine. Panic bubbled beneath her skin, but she clung to the hope that the shadows were nothing more than the product of a weary mind. Still, as she turned to leave, the shadows thickened, coiling around her like grasping vines. In a desperate attempt to escape, Eleanor hurried to the attic, the only place untouched by time. The narrow staircase creaked under her weight, each groan amplifying the anxiety brewing in her gut. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Stepping into the attic, her breath hitched. The air was frigid, thick with the mustiness of forgotten memories. Piles of ancient belongings surrounded her, and in the corner a mirror stood shrouded beneath a dusty sheet. With trembling hands, Eleanor pulled away the fabric, revealing a reflective surface that seemed to ripple and shift. Staring back at her was not her own reflection, but the fleeting images of past residents, faces contorted in despair, belonging to those who had opened the tome before her. They stared out from the mirror, their eyes wide and pleading, murmurs of anguish escaping their lips, drowning in a cacophony that filled the attic with a haunting symphony of regret. Frightened, she stumbled back, but a sudden cold enveloped her, binding her like a serpent. Shadows slithered out from the corners of the room, elongated forms sprouting eyes that glimmered with a hunger that sent irrational terror coursing through her veins. She recalled the warnings in the tome about guardians, entities that sought to protect the secrets hidden in the dark. It dawned on her that the house craved her mother's spirit, tethered by grief and longing, and it had chosen her as the next vessel. Desperation clawed at her, urging her to flee the confines of the attic. She dashed toward the staircase, but the air thickened like molasses, heavy and suffocating. Each step felt like a battle against an unseen force, whispering her name, enticing her to remain, to succumb to the darkness. Eleanor's chest heaved, her breath a series of panicked gasps as she glimpsed figures gathering at the entrance, their faces twisted in torment. As Eleanor surrendered to the chaos, remembering her mother's last words about the house and its hunger, she realized it wanted more than just a vessel. It sought dominion over their lineage, the cycle of loss and possession never ending. The realization struck like a thunderclap, the walls of the house vibrating with an insatiable energy. In that moment, her will shattered, breaking like fragile glass. She screamed, a sound drowned by the whispers of the forsaken past, consumed by legs of darkness reaching from the corners, enveloping her in a chaotic embrace. As her vision blurred, Eleanor felt time dissolve, the past winding into the present where her name joined the chorus of lost souls in the mirror, forever trapped, wandering the corridors of memory and regret. In the days that followed, the townsfolk spoke of a flickering light in a dusty attic and saw shadows darting in and out of the decrepit Victorian. They whispered about the haunting melodies that echoed through the night air. But Eleanor's name fell silent, her memory lost amongst the phantoms of Thornfield Lane, where time stood still and darkness thrived, a hunger never to be sated. The house remained, a solemn guardian of secrets, waiting patiently for the next heart tangled in grief to traverse its threshold.